The Minister will also meet his obligation under Section 6.1 of the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Act 9 of 2009. That requires the Minister to submit to Parliament the MTBPS. Public hearings will be conducted virtually on Wednesday, 6 November 2024. Submissions and your indication on whether you want to make an oral presentation must be received by no later than 12 o'clock on Monday, 4 November 2024. Submissions must be directed to the committee secretaries, Mr. Alan Wickham and Mr. Sipanya, Standing Committee on Finance, and Mr. Nkululeko Mangweni, Select Committee on Finance, 3rd floor, 90 Plain Street, Cape Town. Or email to awicom@parliament.gov.za, tsepanya@parliament.gov.za, and nmangweni@parliament.gov.za. Copies of the 2024 MTBPS will be available on 30th October 2024 at www.treasury.gov.za. Your Parliament, your voice, your future.
Grips with what has really been holding South Africa back and what we now need to do to ensure a better future for more of our citizens with growth and jobs.
Do you think that the minister has said enough in order to eliminate fiscal consolidation?
Well, I think that he said enough to get us started down this journey. There's a long path ahead of us. But I think that with the discipline and the outline that the minister has set out today, if we stick to that, if we stick to the debt servicing rule, the fiscal anchor, if we stick to the spending regime, I think that we will soon start to see the green shoot starting to develop in the economy, which is going to lift more people out of poverty and lift more people into opportunity.
Following this pitch, what can we expect from your department to assist, in particular, the small-scale farmers?
Well, obviously, we're already doing a lot with grants going out there, but greater partnership across the sector to be able to ensure greater inclusion for small farmers in the value chain, both local and export value chains, through targeted support, through assistance, through extension services, and through access to patient capital. One of the other things the Minister spoke about was disaster management. We're looking very hard in the department, working with the Land Bank and others, to look at how we can bring in cheaper insurance, index insurance, crop insurance for farmers, so that they're not subject to having to wait for almost a year to get disaster management funding.
Just briefly for the last time, just sum it up in Afrikaans, your outtake from the minister's speech.
Ek dink dit was baie goeie begin. Die minister het ons op 'n nuwe pad gesit. Ek dink dat as ons die moed het om saam te werk en hierdie tot die waarheid te bring, dan ek dink dit sal Suid-Afrika se finansiële toekoms verseker. En ek dink dis die belangrikste ding.
Baie dankie meneer. That was Mr. Johnston Hazen, the Minister of Agriculture. I'm now standing with Mr. Ethel Trollip. Mr. Trollip, thank you very much. Temingosi from Parliament TV. Can we get your views and your reflections from the minister's speech?
You know, I'm really sorry to do this, but it was uninspiring. 36 minutes, budget presented, and look at these are some of the indexes: revenue down, expenditure up, budget deficit up, economic growth down, debt and interest up. Those are all going in the wrong direction, all of them. Our growth projection of 1.8% over the next 3 years is nowhere near sub-Saharan African and BRICS countries. They're all around 4%. So until we start growing this economy, we're going to have to listen to these kind of budgets. And this government, even though it's a new government, has clearly not got the message that they haven't been able to cut their cloth to what they can afford. We still have the biggest bloated cabinet one of the biggest in the world. We're running out of water. No special mention about new water infrastructure, new dams, maintaining the infrastructure we've got. The minister said there's some more money for upgrading or revitalizing urban rail network. What happened to them? How were they allowed to disintegrate into the state that they are in? So I must tell you, I'm really, really disappointed in what the Minister of Finance presented today. You know, there's a saying that says, the elephant gave birth to a mouse. The tragedy is that I didn't expect any different, and he delivered on what I expected. Underwhelming. Bathi ngesixhosa, indlovu izele impuku.
That was Mr. Ethel Trollip of Action SA. And now, standing with me is Mr. Vuyo Zungula, the President of African Transformation Movement. Parliament TV. Uziva njani emveni koba umphathiswa wezezimali ethethe nelizwe malunga nale mini budget?
Umphathiswa uzibalulile izinto esisengxakini ngazo sililizwe. Uchilo ukuba imali irevenue iphansi kakhulu kodwa akazina solution. Aphinda athethe apho kuba iproblem economy ayizukhula, meaning asuzukwazi uaddressa le problem esinayo eyintswele ngqesho. CATM kudala sisitsho ukuba maka focus on ukukhulisa imali. Number 1, une illicit trade apho, for example tobacco industry, the illicit tobacco industry, there's more than 18 billion in taxes esinokwazi ukuyifumana phana. There's illicit financial flows kananjalo apho besikwazi ukungenisa imali. Number 2, when it comes to transform economy, make sure biyakhula, make sure kwenza imisebenzi, ukuqinisekisa uba urhulumente akaspendi imali eninzi on big business. And number 2, uyakwazi ukuqinisekisa ukuba kuspendwa more on production driven initiatives, not leni basikwakhiwe imall kodwa ifactory azikho. So ngokunowethu kothi CATM asonelisekanga tu namhlanje.
Ngokubona kwakho ingaba ezifactory umphathiswa athetha ngazo versus imalls aziba usitsho azuzwavula wona amathuba emisebenzi?
Befanba apha ikhona into eclear ecacileyo kuba nazi ifactory zizonze oku noku and zizokwenziwa ilizwe lonke. Asifuni ifactory ezoba seKapa qha okanye bese Gauteng qha. Sifuna uthi xa usiya ePort St Johns zibe khona ifactory, uxa usiya eZanini zibe khona ifactory. Ngalomazwi i-economy ikwazi ucirculate kwizandla ezininzi, ungabi ne-economy yaseSouth Africa ekwidolophu ezintathu qha.
Ugqibezela zeziphi ezinye izinto iziphakamiso ocinga bafanele umphathiswa uzenzile engakumbi ezimalunga nentswela-ngqesho?
Apha xa ithetha ngentswela-ngqesho akakwazanga uadressa imicimbi kakuhle, because ukuze uadressa intswela-ngqesho kuyanyanzeleka ukuba makuyekwe le nto ukuba i-economy okanye i-government spending iya isikakhulu kwezi big businesses. Amashishini asakhasayo ona akafumani kwanto, because if ebetshilo apho ukuba at least a certain percentage of his spending izoya on SMMEs besizobona ukuba ba serious, but uthetha nje gabalala bengekho specific on SMME procurement akonda ayithethileyo.
Mhlekazi wami ndiyabulela kakhulu.
Dabulele.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm good, thank you, sir. If you can just give us, first introduce yourself and then give us your reflections on the Minister's budget statement.
Sure. My name is Ashwar Sarupin. I'm the Deputy Minister of Finance for the GNU. I think that the Minister's taken some bold steps today to make announcements on how to get South Africa's economy growing. He announced bold reforms on infrastructure, which shows that the GNU is working because we're now giving South Africans a way out of water cuts, make sure that load shedding doesn't return through investing in infrastructure so that South Africa actually does grow and that we do build a stronger economy with more jobs. We're also going to deal with the debt problem. And the Minister also took some bold steps there to say we cannot continue down this trajectory. 22 rand out of every 100 rand the government spends is on interest and debts. And the Minister today put the brakes on that and said we are now rebalancing our spending towards services, towards paying off the debts, and to getting South Africa fixed. So I'm very excited about what we have done at the Treasury. I think I'm very proud of what the team has done. And I think we've put forward a credible growth path for South Africa so that we can do what we promised and what the GNU has promised, which is to get South Africa moving forward again.
DM, thank you very much for talking.
Very much. I appreciate it.
All right, we're still with Parliament TV. We are getting reflections from the Minister's budget speech, and standing with me now is the Chief Whip of the largest party, Mr. Mtumiseni Ntuli. Mhlekazi, thank you very much for taking this interview with Parliament TV.
Thank you very much, Mhlekazi, and thanks for having us, and good afternoon to you and all our viewers at home.
The Minister delivered his first medium budget policy statement for the government of national unity. What do you make of today's speech?
Well, there are a few points that I want to highlight, which in our view are very central to what we call a national agenda in our country. The first one is the stability in terms of our macroeconomic policies, which is very central to the work of the democratic state. The second one, of course, is to deal with the question of the infrastructure, the rollout of infrastructure for service delivery, particularly paying a much more biased attention to the infrastructure that has been affected by disasters. In many parts of our country, KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape, Limpopo, and many parts of our country are still lagging behind in terms of addressing the infrastructural backlog, which was occasioned by the disaster to the climate change that is taking place.
And what do you think are some of the challenges that are causing those delays?
Well, I think, of course, one of the problems is that the economy has not been growing in a way that allows a generation of the revenue sufficient for the state to prioritize and intervene on those projects. But I think it's also important that in that work of government, we do need to call on the private sector to also join hands with the democratic state, because the challenges can be very overwhelming. And countries that succeed, they do so only because there is a tight coordination and cooperation between the public and the private sector.
And what are then some of the mechanisms as Parliament that you're going to implement in order to hold the executive to account?
Well, of course, the commitment has been detailed in public, and it's going to be very important for Parliament to ensure that we make the Minister, through the Portfolio Committee and Parliament in general, to make sure that the democratic government really accounts on the commitment that they have made, because these commitments are not just words that cannot be followed by the commitment, followed by the accountability, which Parliament is going to play a leading role in that regard.
As we stand, the unemployment is currently standing at 33.5%, which is a big number. So what are you going to do based on this budget speech to ensure that there are job opportunities, especially for the youth, because we know that from that 33.5%, they are the biggest chunk of the unemployed?
You see, the problem of unemployment is one of the major challenges facing our country, and we are very happy that if you look at the consistency, the Minister made a commitment in February this year that a lot of investment is going to be directed to addressing the energy crisis. Because without energy and with load shedding that we were contending with the whole of last year and before, it was impossible for the government and the private sector to generate new jobs and absorb the many people, especially the youth of our country. But also the intervention by the South African Reserve Bank with the decrease on the rates. All of those actions and steps are going to be quite helpful to ensure that there's a consolidation of our fiscals and there's a direct investment to infrastructure, which is at the center of what we need to do to achieve the developmental trajectory of our country, but equally to address the challenges of unemployment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was Mr. Mtumiseni Ntuli, the Chief Whip of the leader of the majority party. And now I have with me the Minister of Minerals, Mr. Gwet Mantashe. We are not newsroom, we are Parliament TV. Good afternoon, Mhlekazi. Can we get your reflection from the Minister's speech, please?
The budget was a balancing act, serious one, by the Minister of Finance in a very critical period. For example, if you go to that budget, one of the most important things is him acknowledging the low role of his predecessors who have passed on. That was quite respectful of him. Number two, it was quite important for him to talk to the actual attempt to reduce the debt, because the debt cost is the biggest cost in the budget, and if there's an effort to reduce the debt, that is quite a serious effort. And the Procurement Act is going to give access to opportunities for smaller and emerging companies, and that is quite important for opportunities in the market.
We've heard a number of times about the debt reduction. So what are some of the mechanisms that you think the minister should implement in order to see that this debt reduction becomes a reality?
Debt reduction should never be artificial. It must talk to the reality of the economy. For example, look at the allocation of the budget allocation. 47% is in national government, 42% is in provinces, 10% is in local government. And that allocation must practically deal with the reduction of debt at those various levels of the state. If it's not addressed there, it is not going to happen.
Gombe umyalezo nothathu sebantwini basecala malunga nale budget speech kaMinister namhlanje.
Abantu basecala mabavuyele into yokuba la Procurement Act ithi abantu abafufuzayo bazaba nethuba lokungena bafumana amathuba okwenza ibhizinesi bona ngokwabo iyawubanceda abantu basecala loo nto.
Siyabulela mhlekazi wami.
Enkosi.
Well, that was Minister Gwet Mantashe, and standing with me now is Mr. Matthew Parks of the Congress of South African Trade Unions. Mr. Parks, the Minister has spoken, you were present. What do you make of the speech?
Look, it is a business as usual speech, no big surprises. No, but nothing really new. And I think for us that's a disappointment. We have an economy growing at 1%, barely. We have a 42% unemployment rate. We're not seeing what really out of this budget is going to shift things decisively. There is good parts, like we've seen the good work done by Eskom to end load shedding. We see a stabilization of transit, but we need to get much more to these if we really to unlock the economy, because we're not out of the woods yet. There are some parts about giving additional reinforcement to parts of the state, like home affairs and so forth. Funds for disaster relief, that's good. But if you look at some of the performance targets of some departments like basic education, water, agriculture, land reform, very far behind. The state of local government is extremely worrying. We're not really seeing what's going to change on that front. But there is good parts too. So it's a mixed bag, but not enough to really get the economy growing.
There has been a number of talks regarding the bloated public service, and one of the major factors that take on a lot of the budget is the wage bill, and taking that with and putting it, aligning with the austerity measures. What would you say on behalf of the workers of South Africa? Should they be fearing that there might be some cuts in wage bill, which will then include mean loss of jobs? So what would you say to the South African workers that are watching you right now?
So look, so the wage negotiations for the public service there's still negotiations taking place. We're hopeful that the parties will find each other. I think there's discussion, still early days, but I think for us the bottom line is workers must be protected from inflation. We can't afford workers to earn less after the increase. They must earn more. Inflation has taken a real toll upon workers, and you can see in the budget the wage bill is not out of control. It's actually decreased from 35 to 31% of the budget, and we're very worried about that because it means numbers of vacancies are rising. Makes it difficult for nurses, for doctors, for teachers, for police officers to do their work when there's so many vacancies. We think we need to really address the issue, which is growing the economy, fixing the state, creating jobs. But to simply cut is going to make things worse.
Mr. Tao, thank you very much.
Cool, thank you.
Well, that was Mr. Matthew Parks of COSATU speaking to us, and I'm now joined by Mr. Kwakwa of the United Democratic Movement. The minister has delivered his medium-term budget policy statement. What do you make of it?
Firstly, from where we're sitting is that the medium-term budget policy statement, including the expenditure framework over the medium term, has to be pegged on the medium-term development plan, which is still work in progress. Meaning the priorities, how they crafted the budget, is still along the lines of the priorities which were set by the previous administration and not the current GNU government. That's number one. Number two, we can't talk about embarking on an infrastructure-led growth if the SOEs continue to perform suboptimally. In fact, instead of helping the country with this developmental state mandate, they constitute a drain on the fiscus. And one of the problems is that even in the many instances where we gave bailouts to SOEs, people did not meet those conditions, and there were no consequences in the instances that those SOEs did not meet the conditions. We've always spoken about there needing to be a better alignment between monetary and fiscal policy. You have a stabilizing debt trajectory over the next couple of years. The debt to GDP ratio was expected, even by the rating agencies, to stand at about 90% next year. It's 74% of GDP this year. The inflation outlook has also become very subdued and benign, which means there is scope for the central bank to actually reduce the interest rate. That way, you are able to lower your debt service costs. You'll be able to save about 10 billion rands per annum, which you can redirect to other pressing socio-economic needs. Why am I saying that? It is in context to the fact that we have a revenue shortfall of 22 billion rands. You have to find money within the system. It means that now that the fiscal side of things is struggling a bit, monetary policy has to kick in with a more expansionary monetary policy to try and help the economy and stop this nonsense that they are doing.
Currently, we know that we're standing at 33.5% of unemployment. Do you think that the speech spoke to creating job opportunities?
We were celebrating a surplus, but we are forgetting that you can only achieve that surplus by reducing expenditure, trying to contain it. From where we're sitting, the expenditure sacrifices were made in areas where we're supposed to be spending more money in order to achieve this. It's great in financial sense, but it's very superficial in that you are taking money from causes that are supposed to be improving the plight of the poor. Secondly, the issue about infrastructure-led growth, you need to get the private sector to contribute to fixed capital formation. You need, as a state, to be clear about the investment in fixed capital formation over a period of number of years, because when you build that infrastructure, you create jobs, especially for the unskilled and the semi-skilled people. But the other issue has to do with just making sure that we are able to trade with the rest of the world. I mean, look at what affected, for example, VAT as revenue for the country, is the fact that there were less imports of renewable energy products over the past couple of months, simply because of what? Simply because now the lights are on. It means we have not diversified our import portfolio, including the export portfolio, when we trade with the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Mr. Ngabomzi Kwakwa of the United Democratic Movement. I'm now joined by Mr. Mahlatsi of the United African Transformation, UAT. Take us through your reflections on the minister's budget policy statement.
No, there was actually nothing. There was nothing. If you listen to the statement, it's just a statement to please the international markets. It's just a statement to please the Democratic Alliance. It doesn't say much in terms of what is going to happen and how it's going to be achieved. And now also, it focuses on international developments, and it says nothing about township economy. So you can see the direction is shifting now towards the neoliberal approach, and that will be followed by the policies. And then that shows that your GNU is more focusing on the markets. So yes, it pleases the markets, but the people on the ground, which is who as a UAT we are representing, they cannot say much about this policy. They cannot say much about this statement. But again, one will also have to remember, this thing is a preparation, or maybe it's setting a tone for a fiscal framework for the national budget, whereby we will see if maybe then there will be resources allocated for basic service delivery. Remember, before you talk about the international interest, you start on the ground, the basic needs. These basic needs are called the national priorities, and in the departments they carry them outside as national interest, with an extension of national policy as a foreign policy. But they are already there. They forgot about the people on the ground. So from the UAP point, it's just a statement that they did today. We came here also, our focus was two things: the debt consolidation and just the minister to indicate where are we now as far as the debt on the GDP. Because in February, they spoke about if it can be stabilized, it will be on 74%. So we wanted those figures. There was nothing. You can see he came, very relaxed because he knew that he was here for DA. And then the first people to clap hands were the DA. So that indicates now this GNU is that collusion we've been speaking about.
Mr. Mahlatsi, thank you very much for talking to Parliament TV.
Kanimambo.
That was Mr. Mahlatsi, the leader of the United African Transformation, and standing with me now is Mr. Swart, member of the African Christian Democratic Party. First, medium-term budget policy statement of the Government of National Unity. Your reflection, please.
Well, I think the Minister was very frank and honest about the very difficult financial outlook facing the government, and we saw that in the February's budget, and we see it again now. However, there's a total shift that's now taken place with the Government of National Unity, and we see a positive sentiment towards South Africa. We see that translated as well in this medium-term budget policy statement. And whilst growth levels aren't where we would like them to be, in fact they are down from 1.3% to 1.1% now in this budget, we are trusting that with new ministers and with new initiatives, that economic growth, because that is the answer to all the challenges, economic growth will be translated much higher, and that will result in job creation to help the poorest of the poor in our country, and of course help collect revenues which will help balance the books. Obviously the ACDP is concerned about the escalating public debt levels. The present amount that is spent per year of 388 billion rand just to service the debt is the fastest growing item on the budget. It is unsustainable in the long term, and therefore we welcome the Minister's announcements to rein in that debt and to follow the fiscal consolidation path. One of the measures that is announced is 11 billion rand voluntary severance packages for public servants, and that will reduce the headcount in the public service and hopefully reduce the public sector wage bill, which takes a third of the total budget. The downside of that is, of course, one's got to be careful you don't lose experienced managers in the civil service. That we don't want to lose. So we've got to be careful how we manage that as well, of restructuring the civil service. We also, of course, welcome the positive sentiments that we see in the markets. We see the currency is strengthened. On Monday we saw the Johannesburg Stock Exchange reach record levels. We see inflation is down. The interest rates are coming down. We believe it should be should be brought down much quicker by the Reserve Bank, because that will help our consumers, that will help bonds, mortgage bonds and car allowance, car funds that have to be paid. So there is a very positive sentiment coming from this medium-term budget policy statement. I don't think there's anything really new besides a focus on infrastructure expenditure, which is very important, as opposed to loaning money for consumption, for salaries. So we also welcome the fact of additional funds for Parliament. I'm sure you also agree with that. Obviously to rebuild Parliament, and of course for the Office of the Chief Justice. Being a long-standing member of the Justice Committee, we know the Office of the Chief Justice and the judiciary are really struggling. And therefore we welcome those additional amounts that are given to those very important legs of government. So all in all, we'll be looking at the details of the medium-term budget, and of course when the budget is presented in February, but in principle we think it is broadly acceptable in terms of the new Government of National Unity.
I spoke to a member from the UDM earlier who indicated his concerns that the budget projections seem to be focused on the previous administration's medium-term strategic framework the medium-term development plan has not been established yet. What is your comment on that?
No, I think that's a very valid comment, and I think it will take time. Whilst we are not part of the government of national unity, it will take time for those policies to reach consensus between all the different parties in that, and that growth-enhancing policies, which are acceptable, will be incorporated into that framework. What I've said in the past is often the Minister of Finance would announce policies which he didn't have support in his own party. We are trusting where he announces policies that are growth enhancing and job creation enhancing, that those policies will now have political support across the coalition government to ensure that they are implemented. Because what we are seeing is some of the forecasts, for example, of economic growth aren't being achieved. And that is a bit of a concern to us, because if you're not achieving your projected economic growth and revenue projections, then it is a matter of concern. But I think it's a very valid concern, and it will take time for the GNU to work out the consensus needed to implement the policies that are required to take South Africa to new heights, and which we as the ACDP Trust will occur. Because once the government lifts everyone, then we all will benefit from it, and we trust that it will succeed.
Mr. Swart, thank you very much for talking to us at Parliament.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well,
that are required to take South Africa to new heights, and which we as the ACDP Trust will occur. Because once the government lifts everyone, then we all will benefit from it, and we trust that it will succeed.
Mr. Swart, thank you very much for going on. We will now cross back to the studio.
Finance invites stakeholders and interested parties to submit written submissions on the 2024 revised fiscal framework and revenue proposals. That will be tabled on 30 October 2024 with the MTBPS. The Minister of Finance will table the 2024 medium-term budget policy statement before Parliament on 30 October 2024 in terms of Section 28 of the Public Finance Management Act 1 of 1999, the PFMA. This requires the Minister to table multi-year projections for revenue, expenditure, and key macroeconomic projections on an annual basis. The Minister will also meet his obligation under Section 6.1 of the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Act 9 of 2009. That requires the Minister to submit to Parliament the MTBPS. Public hearings will be conducted virtually on Wednesday, 6 November 2024. Submissions and your indication on whether you want to make an oral presentation must be received by no later than 12 o'clock on Monday, 4 November 2024. Submissions must be directed to the committee secretaries, Mr. Allen Wickham and Mr. Sipanya, Standing Committee on Finance, and Mr. Nkululeko Mangweni, Select Committee on Finance, 3rd floor, 90 Plain Street, Cape Town. Or email to awicom@parliament.gov.za, tsepanya@parliament.gov.za, and nmangweni@parliament.gov.za. Copies of the 2024 MTBPS will be available on 30th October 2024 at www.treasury.gov.za. Your Parliament, your voice, your future.
Parliament. policy this year and for this term, of course, for the next 5 years, is solidarity, equality, and sustainable development. Of course, with that, then the minister gave us his domestic outlook, saying that it would be anchored in 4 pillars. These pillars being in maintaining macroeconomic stability, in implementing structural reforms, supporting growth, enhancing infrastructure, and building state capability. Now let's get into that and start with the first pillar, and this is to maintain macroeconomic stability. Of course, the minister then said that it is all about a stable, transparent, and predictable macroeconomic framework that creates a conducive environment for businesses and households to save, spend, and invest and grow. Of course, these are some of the conversations that we covered earlier in our interviews regarding tightening of the belt, not only within government departments, but we see it in households as well. Because ultimately, what happens at national level trickles down to the very person who is sitting at home and who goes to work on a daily basis. Of course, the National Treasury has a responsibility for oversight and implementation of the macroeconomic policy framework. Now, to strengthen this framework, the minister has assured us that they continue to work on assessing the suitability of the monetary policy targets to improve the levels of the macroeconomic policy coordination. Now, the second pillar to this is implementing structural reforms, including those in Operation Vulindlela. Of course, we know that these are some of important initiatives in ensuring that there is economic participation on all levels and not just on levels that we see. Of course, there's a huge unemployment issue that we're seeing in South Africa. And of course, initiatives such as Operation Vulindlela are some key initiatives that we need in ensuring that we combat unemployment. The minister said that these continue to strengthen the economy to be more productive and internationally competitive and accelerate inclusive economic growth and foster much needed job creation. He then spoke about the first phase of Operation Vulindlela, which provides tangible evidence that structural reforms can reduce economic bottlenecks. He also said that it demonstrates that government can collaborate effectively with business for the collective good. Obviously, this touches on some of the conversations that we had with Dr. Joe, who is the chairperson of finance, the Portfolio Committee on Finance. It also touches on the conversation that we had with the chairperson of the FFC, Dr. Mbava, in terms of collaboration and how effective it is to ensure that there is a relationship between the private and the public sector for the betterment and the achievement of ensuring that all South African households can economically participate. Of course, some of the achievements of Operation Vulindlela include a 50% reduction in cost of data for a 1.5 gigabyte bundle, a reduction in the waiting period for obtaining water use license for almost a year to 90 days, and an introduction of an e-visa system to travelers from 34 countries. Now, with Pillar 3 focuses on infrastructure, and it is about effective infrastructure investment to boost economic activity and enable higher growth over the medium term. Of course, this is one of the standing issues, of course, throughout all the medium term budget policy speeches that have been delivered in the National Assembly. Infrastructure always falls as part of the pillars and part of the strategies and priorities that government always focuses on. In this regard, the minister said that they are implementing reforms that will create conditions to attract greater private sector participation, of course, touching back on the issue of collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. Now, the minister has reported that the reforms include mobilizing significant private sector financing and technical expertise to augment the limited public sector capacity and capability, and also there are amending the PPP regulations to simplify requirements for undertaking these projects. Of course, the amended Treasury Regulation 16 will be published before the end of November for implementation in 2025-26, and the Municipal PPP Regulations 309 will be finalized by June mid next year. Now, with that, the last pillar is government making a concerted effort to increase the pool of funders to diversify public infrastructure financing through new mechanisms and instruments. These include build operator transfer structures and concessions. Of course, these are some of the things that we have mentioned throughout our interviews here. The importance of ensuring economic growth, the importance of eradicating all the socioeconomic issues that we deal with. That is the high unemployment rate. We have poverty, inaccess to quality education, quality healthcare, and access to public affairs and public services. Now, lastly, the minister focuses on the growth in the public service wage bill by ensuring that public servants are compensated fairly while implementing measures to contain overall costs. Of course, in my conversation with Dr. Mbaba, she did say that they made recommendations to the department, to national department, and throughout to the provincial and local in terms of the wage bill. And they're trying to tighten the belt in terms of that because, of course, the wage bill is one of those expenditures, big expenditures that government is challenged with at the moment, apart from the debt that we've been speaking about, and even through the reactions that we've seen that members of parliament, and of course that means you, because they are your representatives, are concerned about. The minister then mentioned that debt is unstable, which is a fair comment with regards to what the conversations that we've had here. And he then says that because debt services costs have become the largest component of their spending, it is rising faster than the economic growth. He then said that the debt service cost has reached 388.9 billion in the current financial year. Put differently, the minister says that for every rand of revenue that government raises this year, 22 cents of this is paid in debt service costs. Of course, this is a huge concern, not only just to parties, but to yourself at home, because it means as a taxpayer, these are some of the grilling issues that we have to look at. And of course, the minister mentioned strengthening local government. And of course, with local government, we have heard a lot of issues with regards to the performance of local governments and how they are not performing to their optimal performance levels. And of course, the national department or the national government saw it keen that it needs to strengthen local government to ensure that their service delivery reaches the people on the ground. Now, the minister said that the local government is foundational to building a capable state that fosters economic growth and responds to societal needs. Of course, then municipalities face serious governance, planning and financial management challenges throughout the country. The minister then said that as it stands, 50 of 257 municipalities in the country have active financial recovery plans. 3 municipalities are under national intervention, and these are Mangaung, Enoch Makima and Lekwa. And quite honestly, to resolve the local government failures systematically, several initiatives are underway. And one of them, of course, is the Eskom municipal debt relief. Of course, lately we have not been having load shedding. However, the issue of the municipal debt, the Eskom municipal debt relief, is one that is a thorn within almost all local government departments, and that needs to be seen to. Now, the minister reported that between March and August of 2024, compliance with relief conditions by municipalities improved from 55% to 76%, aided by the National Treasury, provincial treasuries, and municipal finance improvement program. Of course, this means that hopefully that we will be able to get local governments out of the debt that they have with Eskom, and we'll see more tangible results with regards to service delivery. Now, with that said, of course, the minister has also said that they are now harnessing digital infrastructure by digitizing and simplifying the application and disbursement process to social grants, broadening access to employment pathways, rolling out digital identification documents, and building a centralized and accessible website for all government services. Of course, this is just in preparation of the budget speech that will happen next year in February, and this way the minister was just laying the foundation and giving the country a forecast of this is where we are and these are the plans to ensure that we get to a more sustainable and a more economically participatory kind of country. Stay tuned. You're watching Parliament TV.
Have your say. The Standing Committee on Finance and the Select Committee on Finance invite stakeholders and interested parties to submit written submissions on the 2024 revised fiscal framework and revenue proposals. That will be tabled on 30 October 2024 with the MTBPS. The Minister of Finance will table the 2024 medium-term budget policy statement before Parliament on 30 October 2024 in terms of Section 28 of the Public Finance Management Act 1 of 1999, the PFMA. This requires the Minister to table multi-year projections for revenue, expenditure, and key macroeconomic projections on an annual basis. The Minister will also meet his obligation under Section 6(1) of the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Act 9 of 2009. That requires the Minister to submit to Parliament the MTBPS. Public hearings will be conducted virtually on Wednesday, 6 November 2024. Submissions and your indication on whether you want to make an oral presentation must be received by no later than 12 o'clock on Monday, 4 November 2024. Submissions must be directed to the committee secretaries, Mr. Alan Wickham and Mr. Sipanya, Standing Committee on Finance, and Mr. Nkululeko Mangweni, Select Committee on Finance, 3rd floor, 90 Plain Street, Cape Town. Or email to awickham@parliament.gov.za, tsepanya@parliament.gov.za, and nmangweni@parliament.gov.za. Copies of the 2024 MTBPS will be available on 30th October 2024 at www.treasury.gov.za. Your Parliament, your voice, your future.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Dr. Maimane, please just introduce yourself and tell us which committee you chair.
I am Musi Maimane and I chair the Standing Committee on Appropriations. And a lot of people say, what is appropriations? I tell them, we are the people that make sure we deal with the money and make sure that the money is allocated properly and more than anything is spent according to the programs we want the money to be spent on. So that's the fun part of the job.
That's the primary.
We've got what I like to think, we've got our regular clients. So there are people who come and make submissions all the time, but they're so few, right? So I think on the first instance, it's about identifying key areas where you know that will, for example, South Africa spends 60% of its budget on the social wage. Now, the allocation of that social wage has got implications as to where citizens are. So now we need to be able to say to those citizens, some of them don't understand the budget making process. That's not their area of expertise. Many people don't, to be fair. So how do we capacitate? You know, let me give you a practical example, 2 examples just to give you this. I went, just as a personal passion, I care about ECDs. So I identified ECD centers. I said, come make submissions to the committee. Now that's a proactive way of saying, how as a public representative do I speak to people who this affects the most? To say, come make submissions, because you know, you are field experts, both in terms of technicians, but also in terms of just people who have a broader economic understanding of it. So that's one component. The second is how the committee allocates itself as far as oversight and field visits is going to be important, because we can't just say, well, for the 7th administration, we'll go to all 9 provinces and arbitrarily decide. Let's think hard about saying, okay, let's take higher education as an appropriation. It's an important one. We've heard about issues of NSFAS. We've heard about which universities where you find students not being fed, etc. Well, when you say oversight and public participation, let's meet the students there, talk to them there, so that we can discuss the efficacy of National Student Financial Aid Scheme or the eradication thereof and the appropriations, etc. So all of these discussions then become important. So part of the work that I've been given some thoughts to is how do we target particular areas so that by the 7th administration, we may not fix everything. Budgets speak to everything in the country, but what we may be able to do is to say, in these areas, in a municipality that's returning money, what's the problem here? And how can we work to say, using budgetary tools, how do we amend even how we look at budgeting for that municipality? Because the Minister of Finance is obligated to deal with those municipalities. And how do we give oversight to that? So it's a big job, but it's also one that I find we've got to think about big issues in the country and do oversight targeted to that, whether it's electricity, whether it's water, whether it's logistics. Let's be targeted in how we approach it.
And you are still watching Parliament TV on DSTV channel 408. We are coming to you live from our studios in Cape Town. And of course, the Minister has already delivered the medium-term budget policy statement at the National Assembly. And that was at 2 o'clock. That was almost 2 hours ago. And of course, we got some reactions, some concerns here or there. But this is what we have, and this is the forecast for the budget. Another committee that is tasked with exercising oversight, holding the executive to account and improving public participation and involvement is the Standing Committee on Appropriations. And Mr. Musi Maimane, the chairperson thereof, of which you've just gotten to know, is here with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me, and it's a great privilege, and good afternoon to fellow South Africans.
Thank you. Any thoughts on the Minister's speech?
Look, South Africa finds itself in a very difficult fiscal space at the moment. And so the Minister did a good job at being able to balance off the sense of optimism that has been derived from the first number of days of the Government of National Unity, but also be able to warn some of the difficult challenges that we are faced up to. My deep worry, looking at the budget, is that it felt in certain instances more of the same. Now, if you want to do more of the same, you must accept that here's what the same looks like. It's been 1% of growth for the last 10 years. We are increasing the amount of debt, and so for every 1 rand, 22 cents is spent on debt servicing costs. We are also conscious of the fact that we are taking away from frontline services, so you're going to have less teachers, less healthcare workers, less police. So we've really got to take it as the urgency of the moment and say, how do we bring about change? How do we allocate funding towards infrastructure? How do we ensure that we target growth, that the projected growth is less than 2%, which is still not enough. We need to do more than that. And how do we ensure that we stabilize debt on key state-owned enterprises so that we don't keep focused on bailing them out? So I thought it was a balanced act, but I think I'd like to see more radical action.
Of course, before this, around, I think 11 o'clock to around 1:45, you were in a lock-up session with the NCOP standing committees and the select committees and the standing committees of the National Assembly. What is the role of your committee then in the budget approval process?
Well, effectively, you know, the term appropriation sometimes can seem a bit complicated, but effectively, in essence, what the Minister tables today, what is referred to as the budget, is actually an appropriations bill, which means that each of that indicates the multiple votes that come through. Vote 1 being the presidency, vote 2 being parliament, vote 3 being multiple health, all of those things. They will come before our committee, and it's our committee that interrogates all the various adjustments, looks at whether the programs are aligned in each of those, and then we'll write a report at the end of the day to say we endorse the budget. The Money Bills Act, actually, which is what our committee is governed by, actually gives our committee even an opportunity to make amendments if we need to, or make recommendations, and that's part of the work that oversight does. You can't just say oversight and rubber stamp what the executive does. You need to be able to give sufficient thinking towards what else needs to happen. So there will be a conversation about that going into committee. And then ultimately we've got to look and say, the special appropriation that was put forward today that the minister has proposed can only be processed and passed by our committee. And so from the next number of weeks, we'll be engaging on the special appropriation that's been put forward. We'll look at some of the adjustments that are on the table, but we also are calling for the public to make submissions on the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, but also the Appropriations Bill that's coming up that will be voted on in Parliament before the end of the year. So each of those have to be considered.
Now, with that, how does the committee then ensure effective oversight on government spending, especially now with the debt crisis that we have and the tightening of belts that we've had to do?
One of the things we've done as a committee is taken each member of the committee and given them sections of the budget so that they can have a look at various sections. There are members who will look at in each function what are the respective departments that go in there. So a member might be able to say, instead of looking at the whole budget, let me focus on social services, or let me focus on community services, or let me focus on economic services. All of those are designed in such a way that the member can be able to interrogate each sections of the budget, look at oversight and say, are the programs aligned? And then furthermore, is the spending that has been put there delivering what it was intended for in citizens? So if we take health as an example, of which one of the members has been allocated, they can look and say, what limits the money ending up with the patient, with the person really, the citizen? If it's issues of, for example, medical legal claims, let's have a look at those. If it's issues of saying the employee costs are high, let's look at those issues. So there are multiple components that eventually say that members are designed to give oversight to those. And then as a committee collectively, as we engage citizens, invite various departments to come and make submissions. For example, Parliament has been given, has been put in the special appropriation. We'll certainly be inviting the Speaker and the Executive so that they can understand what is the intention behind it, what does it look to do, and does it achieve the interests of the people of South Africa. We called various departments. So the oversight work, it's sometimes onerous. We're the busiest committee in Parliament, I think, and we meet more regularly than any other one. So it's a lot of work.
I think some chairpersons will beg to differ.
They can differ all they like. They must come and explain their case. All the bills, more than half the bills that will be passed in the 7th administration will be from our committee. Let them come and bring their talk is cheap.
All right, Chair. Now, with that said, what are some of the recommendations then to the different departments with regards to ensuring that government debt is assessed sustainably and to ensure that they combat it?
Yeah, look, on the first, debt starts off by saying, what are the conditions within which the debt was brought on? And I want to make it easy for the people of South Africa. If you are a bad creditor, the banks charge you more. Now, we've been through a period of corruption, downgrades, but also grey listing by South Africa, which means that our debt repayments are much higher. So one of the things that was important that the minister said today is that FATF, which is the institution that monitors whether we can remain on the grey listing list or not, has welcomed the fact that South Africa is starting to make progress. Now, if we make progress on that issue, that will ensure that the interest levied on debt reduces, because that should hopefully translate into better investment criteria for South Africa, cheaper access to capital, but also as we begin to move ourselves in terms of junk status to a much higher gradings, we can be able to achieve where the cost of capital is better and the cost of borrowing is better. That's on one component. On the second component is that obviously, let's take Eskom as an interesting one. Eskom has got quite a significant debt. We've appropriated 260 billion rands, of which over the medium term we'll spend some money. For example, when you read the actual statement by the minister, Eskom were given some conditions upon which that debt can be serviced. And one of them was, of course, that they must sell Eskom Holding so that you're not giving money to Eskom for them to finance all of these subsidiary companies. And if they fail to do that, then we must be able to take the punitive measures that go with it. So you'll see in the medium-term budget framework that Eskom will lose 2 billion not only in this first financial year but the further, which means they are not complying with conditions. So whatever appropriation you put on the table, make sure there's compliance on conditions. And then the last thing I think is going to be key is to eradicate wasteful and fruitless expenditure, which is what the Auditor General keeps raising as a continuous. So serial offenders must begin to feel the pain by the issuance of things like the certificate of debt and ensuring that actually if you can't spend your money properly, we must be able to deal with. And so one of the things that came out even in this medium-term budget is looking at issues like rollovers, etc. You can only apply for those once. And then after that, I think we need to think hard about saying, if the department has no capacity to spend, how do we redirect this? But the ultimate thing that deals with debt, doesn't matter how we look at it, what interventions, is growth, growth, growth. If you are not growing, your debt as a proportion to GDP will worsen if your GDP is not growing and your debt is growing. Naturally, that becomes worse. But if you are growing your GDP because you are borrowing for infrastructure, you are able to manage your debt. It's the same for anyone else. If you have a house and you've taken a bond on your house, the harder you work and the more you earn, the easier it is to manage your bond. But the less you work, the less you earn, the harder it is to pay your bond, which means you can't spend on other things like a car, like school fees, etc.
Now, with that then, what are some of the strategies in place to reduce budget deficit?
Growth. It has to be infrastructure driven. We have to see growth because when you grow, you can create a budget surplus that allows you the space to then begin to manage what you're trying to do. So 1.8%, which is what's projected for next year, we've got to aim higher. We've got to be able to push harder. We are aware of global demand. We are conscious of global growth, which is suppressed. But I think South Africa, relative to other emerging markets, we are underperforming, and that is on us. So we've got to think hard about what are those things that we are not doing. One of them was obviously the limitation on energy, but the other is obviously making sure that we can give broadband infrastructure so that more and more data costs are reduced. The third is obviously making sure that our road infrastructure and our ports work better. So if you are not able to, that's about reducing the balance of payment and exports. So we've got to increase imports and limit the amount of things that we import. South Africa needs to be a net exporter higher and ensure that our manufacturing hub is improved so that we can send goods overseas. And then ultimately, along with infrastructure, is about the skilling of your workforce. If your people are not skilled, they end up, and that's about a poor education, you end up in a space where not only can you attract investment to match those skills, but you end up your skilled people leaving the country, and so you've got the skills deficit that sits in the state. And so I think those are some of the key priorities we've got to look at.
Jay, we've covered the role of the committee. We've covered some of the challenges, and we've covered the strategies that your committee has now recommended and how you perform oversight. Let's look at opportunity and possible innovation, right? Now, the impact of budget cuts is felt throughout all the three spheres of government. What are some innovative measures that your committee will adopt to ensure efficient and effective oversight?
Yeah, it starts with us as a committee, right? How we meet, how regularly we meet, rather than physically always meeting, we can do it virtually. That makes it cheaper, makes it more effective. How Parliament works itself. But those are a few rands and cents here and there. Some of the opportunities that sit before us is the fact that an ability to be able to digitize the whole of the state. You know, there's a lot of wasteful and fruitless expenditure as a matter of what the state does in its own print works, in various departments. Those become difficult. I think we've got some new opportunities in how, if we can eradicate old ways of doing things, we can do things better and more effective and avoid leakages. So when we do transfers, when we do all of that the state looks after every rand and cents, and that's using things like blockchain technology, allowing ourselves to process payments, to really be aggressive at the removal of corruption and wasteful expenditure. And I think there's a massive opportunity. Next year, as South Africa chairs the G20 forum, we've got to say to ourselves, how do we take our message and make it a global player and force for inclusion? Because that's a massive opportunity for us to showcase South Africa. You'll have leaders from all over the world. their support, etc. If we digitize visa adjudication, make it easier for citizens to arrive here, tourism can be a massive opportunity for us to be able to say, let's make South Africa an attractive place, not only just to invest, but for you to come and visit and come and experience this beautiful country of ours.
And with that, is there room for opportunities of budget reform or innovation?
Yeah, of course. And one of the jobs that I've got now coming up as a priority, hopefully before Christmas, be able to look at how we amend the Money Bills and Related Matters Act. And that's about making sure that the timetable makes it possible to make recommendations. When it comes to issues of budget cuts, in budget line items, I think you're going to find it difficult. A lot of programs have already been prioritized, but we've got to say to ourselves, let's focus on infrastructure, and so the sacrifices are worthwhile. We have a threat and an opportunity. I think when it comes to issues of climate change, in the next while, we're going to have to think hard about what does climate change mean for South Africa. It means at some level, we can't be coal dependent, which means it opens up new industries through solar, wind, and all other technology. That's a massive opportunity. But it also does mean that as it comes to disasters that are coming on board, those create a massive risk, because you would have seen also in KZN the destruction of infrastructure as a function of climate change. You would have seen in other parts where there are droughts and South Africa becoming water insecure. So these are complexities that we're going to have to manage going forward.
And final words to South Africans on encouragement on why they should follow the Committee on Appropriations, why they should be involved, and why they should participate in the processes and the committee's work.
The first starting point is that this is our country. All of us are investors in this country. We all pay tax. We all suffer, good or bad, of this country. We all must get involved. There's a massive opportunity. But the second thing I'd like to say to South Africans is that let's dream. I think South Africa, we've lost ambition. If I'm honest with myself, I think when we pass our kids at 30%, we are telling them that they must be confined to unemployability. When we've got to dream afresh. What country do we want to see? And I see a country, yeah, sure, let's allow ourselves to think about bullet trains. That's massive rollout of infrastructure. Let's allow ourselves the dream that every child will be a digital citizen. Why can't internet be available for everybody? Well, let's fight against the eradication, or let's fight for the eradication of poverty. Let's make sure no one goes to bed hungry in this country, whereas we've got so much other people wasting food. So, and also in a multi-dimensional poverty space, it's also a matter of saying to them, look, let's avoid a space where someone can't gain access to a school or can't gain access to a healthcare facility. Let us dream big. So my message to South Africa is that people perish because of a lack of vision. And if we keep trying to fix yesterday, we will end up with outcomes that suit our parents than suit our children. My only worry today is what are we doing for our kids? Because that's about the future of this country. And any parent in this country, that must be something that keeps you awake at night.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
That was the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Appropriation. And of course, he was sharing his thoughts on the medium-term budget policy statement that was tabled here in the National Assembly about 2 hours ago. And of course, for more information on the work of that committee, you can visit the website at www.parliament.gov.za. And to stay informed about Parliament's engagements, follow, like, subscribe on all social media networks at Parliament of RSA. Stay tuned.
Have your say. The Standing Committee on Finance and the Select Committee on Finance invite stakeholders and interested parties to submit written submissions on the 2024 revised fiscal framework and revenue proposals. That will be tabled on 30 October 2024 with the MTBPS. The Minister of Finance will table the 2024 medium-term budget policy statement before Parliament on 30 October 2024 in terms of Section 28 of the Public Finance Management Act 1 of 1999, the PFMA. This requires the Minister to table multi-year projections for revenue, expenditure, and key macroeconomic projections on an annual basis. The Minister will also meet his obligation under Section 6(1) of the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Act 9 of 2009. That requires the Minister to submit to Parliament the MTBPS. Public hearings will be conducted virtually on Wednesday, 6 November 2024. Submissions and your indication on whether you want to make an oral presentation must be received by no later than 12 o'clock on Monday, 4 November 2024. Submissions must be directed to the committee secretaries, Mr. Alan Wickham and Ms. Tebucho Sipanya, Standing Committee on Finance, and Mr. Nkululeko Mangweni, Select Committee on Finance, 3rd floor, 90 Plain Street, Cape Town. Or email to awicom@parliament.gov.za, tsepanya@parliament.gov.za, and nmangweni@parliament.gov.za. Copies of the 2024 MTBPS will be available on 30th October 2024 at www.treasury.gov.za. Your Parliament, your voice, your future.
Welcome back. You're still tuned in to Parliament TV on DSTV channel 408. And that was it for today. We had the medium-term budget policy statement where the Minister of Finance delivered it today at 2 o'clock. We hosted a couple of interviews with some of the chairpersons of the finance committees. We also invited the chairperson of the Financial Fiscal Commission. We had the director of the Parliamentary Budget Office. I think as such we should be calling it a day today. And ikamalamna ndinguthembi Nkosi Ngoma, and it's goodbye.
And of course, on my side, please do visit our website at www.parliament.gov.za to stay informed of all of Parliament's work and the events that are going on here. And you can join the conversation and share your views by following us, liking, subscribing on all social media networks at Parliament of RSA. It is, after all, your Parliament, your voice, your future. Libizolaka ke Tshepo Mori, le saleng hantle.